Theopoetics is one of my favorite topics to introduce people to. In this series, we've talked about kenosis and paracresis, and this is one of those new words to many people that helps us come at an issue or topic from a different angle and really address it in a very different way. So I just wanted to ask you, do you have a favorite poem? What's your favorite poem? Poetry is different than math in an important way. Math is wonderful and necessary in many arenas of life, but there are certain things that just can't be addressed with a formula. It just can't be captured in an x plus y equals z. It's just not that linear or tight. And God seems to be one of those topics where poetry is more appropriate than math. The divine, transcendent, eternal, cosmic beyond is not something that fits easily into a series of mathematical formulas. Theopoetics is a way of talking about this divine eternal that allows for playful, uncertain, mysterious, and intriguing ways to capture our imagination of the might be and the what can be. So don't be intimidated. This is a fairly new development, Theopoetics, in the theological arena, but it really opens up in an aesthetic way, an approach to spirituality and even biblical interpretation that just sort of unties some of those things that we get knotted up about. It gets in there and it loosens it up a little bit and gives it room to breathe and to grow. It lets the air in and brings some freshness to the perspective. So this contemporary approach to theopoetics can be traced directly to 1971, a guy named Stanley Hooper. And it's actually his student, David Miller, that helps us understand. And if you want to read the PDF that's up on the blog, on the website, I think it would be really helpful to you. But this is a form of poiesis. It's a type of knowledge or a bringing about in a poetic way, a completion that gets us away from the dogmatic or the confined ologies of theology and philosophy. And it subverts what can become a lifeless sort of theology or a metaphysic with everything figured out and explained in a totalizing way. It opens it up to the beautiful and the poetic that is unexplored within it. So Denny Weaver is somebody who's thought about such things, and I really like how he talks about this. He says that theopoetics might be a hybrid of poetry and theology, but to call it that misses the mark. It's an entire way of thinking. From a side of poetry, it shows that ideas are more than abstractions. They have form, visual, verbal, and sensual, and are thus experienced at least as much as they are thought. What one learns from the theology side of theopoetics has as much importance. One observes that theology is more than abstraction. It's a way of thinking, visualizing, and sensing images about God. It brings multiple ways of considering God, and thus for theologians, theopoetics will underscore, sometimes reluctantly, the admission that theology is one form of truth, but not to be confused with the truth itself. One of the upsides of theopoetics is that it grows out of this aesthetic or sensual or experiential knowledge, and thus it discourages the gatekeeping mentality of drawing boundaries and then guarding who's in and who's out. It has sort of a postmodern inflected style of discourse without doing that thing we all hate, which is the slippery slope of skepticism, which takes away the ability of anyone to say nearly anything at all. Another interesting wrinkle of theopoetics is that it is compelled by the insistence of incarnation. It's not just content, but it's method. Theopoetics wants to practice theology. It's a spiritual practice, and it accepts the limitations or the limitedness of humanity, knowing that our words can only take us so far. Think about it as a language of theology. It conveys spiritual truths, but it's a language spoken with the accent of somebody whose first tongue is not academic, but sensual, who's not primarily concerned with getting something down on paper, but that at any moment we might be caught up into a grand dance. And the thing I love about it the most is that it reminds us that all of us, believers, pastors, theologians, no matter our vocation, we are called to dance, not just to think about dancing. Because if we close our eyes, there is a music that plays in the world, and it makes us cry, and it calls us to make love. It wants us to live and to write and to pray as if the world were a gift. So if we think about this approach of theopoetics, about our last two subjects, S and R, when it comes to S is for salvation, it starts to open up our experience and our understanding so that it's not just transactional, that we don't say I'm saved as if that's a done deal, written in stone, and right. But it opens up the possibilities for all that might mean, the ways that it manifests in our life, and that it invites us up into this grand story. I love the idea, the Hebrew idea of tikkun olam, God's healing of the world, the bringing all things to right. This shalom connectedness of closing the circle, of bringing us all into relationship, of experience, the living goodness that it is to be. And when we think about R is for revelation, it's just not enough to boil everything down to the black and white, one-dimensional reading of a text, but to breathe life into it and to see what it becomes and how it moves and dances and impacts us, what it calls out of us and what it speaks into us, how it reads us, how the text reads us, and what it says about us as we speak it into the world. That something is speaking through us is just an amazing thing to contemplate. Theopoetics is one of those things that I never knew about, but that once I stumbled into, I quickly fell in love with. It has opened up my emotions, my imagination, my dreams, and given real zip and zest to my spiritual practices. I hope that you enjoy reading the article that I put up there. My friend Khaled Keefe Perry was instrumental in helping me put that together, and I want to thank him for that.